everybody. Today I am super excited to have a very special guest. Our guest for today is Yael Goodman. And you know, guys, that I've been taking a tour guide course in over the last few months, hopefully finishing it by next year, next May. And out of all of the guides that we had, and they're all the best guides because I'm taking the course at the best school in Israel for tour guides, which Yael used to teach as well, and she is still an active member because she led a tour there. Out of all the tours, the tour of Yael especially resonated with myself. We were standing and she was talking, and I said to myself, you know what? These are the kind of things I would say in a tour as well. So I said to Yael afterwards, Yael, I resonated with your style and I enjoyed your tour so much. Would you be willing to come online and talk to our community about you being a tour guide in Jerusalem for so many years, 25 years, you cannot believe, but she's been doing it from the age of 5, roughly, right? So for 25 years now. And she's been not just touring Jerusalem, as I sent you in the email, not just walking around Jerusalem as the psalm suggests, but rather running. So we'll talk about that, and it's an amazing opportunity to host Yael. A little bit about the history. So Yael, you've been doing it for so many years. You've been doing it as part of your military service, right? And
actually, in the military service, I was a commander. I was a drill sergeant, and I actually trained more like basic training and how to shoot guns. But I think that the Army helped me understand that I can stand in front of an audience and speak. So definitely I can say that my Army service progressed me to choose that job.
Okay. And after the service, you joined kind of touring, guiding initially kids and soldiers, and later on also adults and tourists and local tourism. And you've got the whole range, the whole spectrum of people in Jerusalem. On the one hand side, soldiers who have to listen carefully, otherwise who knows the repercussions, and people, little kids and old people. And we would like to kind of share your experience as such a great Jerusalem tour guide. And if I forgot something in the introduction, you're more than welcome to add whatever you want about yourself and what you've been doing. And then we'll talk a little bit about Jerusalem and about your very special initiative of Run Jerusalem.
First of all, Netanel, thank you very, very much for giving me an opportunity to speak here, really. So I was born and raised in Jerusalem, and my mother's from Oklahoma City and my father's from Massachusetts. That's how I speak English. My mother comes from a Roman Catholic family. She converted into Judaism, and she and my father became Orthodox Jews living in Jerusalem. And I remember ever since I was a little girl, my Catholic family would come to Jerusalem, and my mother would tell me, sugar doll, go take him to the church. And she meant the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, but I didn't know the story. I didn't know what happened there. I just knew how to get there and to point my finger and to say, this is the church.
I love the fact that when you quoted your mother, you went with her accent as well.
Absolutely. When you grow up from a mom from Oklahoma, you know, the sugar doll comes out. So yeah, when I finished my Army service, I just did the tour guide course, and I started working with, like you said, with youth. Usually they give the new rookie tour guides, the younger kids, kind of like to practice before they give you, before you get years into learning how to guide, learning how to stand in front of a group. And I think most importantly, learning how to run a group, which is logistics. Logistics is everything. You need to know where the bathrooms are. You need to know where the money changer is. You need to know all these little elements in order to make the tour smooth. And only experience will really teach you that. So I think I guided for probably 10 years before I decided to get married and have kids. And when I had kids, I couldn't really go on these long day tours, these 10-day tours where I'm not at home and I'm just touring all the time. And that's when I went to train tour guides in Yad Ben Tzvi, where Netanel is doing his tour guide course.
Which is the best school in Israel, guys. And I'm not just saying it. It so happens to be that the guy in charge of the tour guide course is taking the tour guide course with us. Okay, and he said to me, Why did you choose Yad Ben Tzvi?" I said to him, "Listen, his name is Arik." I said, "Listen, I went to all kinds of different people who taught in courses of tour guides, and I asked them, where should I go? And I actually had debated with myself, should I take the course in English or in Hebrew? And everyone with whom I spoke about this question kept saying, listen, this, that, the other, but if you're able to, go to Yad Ben Tzvi, if you're able to do that, because it's not so close, I don't live in Jerusalem. They said, if you can go to Yad Ben Tzvi, go to Yad Ben Tzvi. That's and that's the real story. This is how I chose to go to Yad Ben Tzvi.
Yeah, so Arik, who was my previous boss, who runs the whole institute, he interviewed me for the job, and we started off with these tour guide courses in Yad Ben Tzvi. So that was great. I got to train guides for the time that I had my 3 children, and I was able to have a routine where I know when I'm home, and we would go and do our day excursions that you need to do in the tour guide course. And then at some point, I went back to guiding a little bit. And I'm already on my 25th year of guiding the old city of Jerusalem. But I did take a break. I moved to San Diego for 2 years. Living in Jerusalem, we decided that we wanted a little bit of a break from living in Jerusalem because we wanted to continue living in Jerusalem. And sometimes you just need a breather from the city. So we chose Southern California. That's where I started doing triathlons and losing a lot of weight, and I become a Pilates teacher, and I got into like this whole wellness streak in my life. We did return after 2 years, and that's when I had the idea of doing the running tours, is to combine my running and my guiding.
And what's the difference, except for, I know that if I were to do running tours, the only thing I could convey with my mouth to the people I guide is panting, basically. How is, except for the obvious part of you have to have to be in very good shape, how is a running tour different than a walking tour?
It's a great question, and I get this question a lot because the whole product of running tours makes people go like, what did you just say? It kind of like you need to teach people what this is. I think the major difference between a regular tour and a running tour is that on a regular tour, you walk a little bit and your tour guide will talk a lot to explain and to stand in front of a site for like 10, 15, some guides, 20 minutes. I promise when I teach my guides, I tell them that less is more, and we know that. So
I am not there yet. For me, I have the problem of talking the people's ears off because I come from a position of a lecturer. So I always have to remember that challenge. Okay, limit yourself 5 minutes, 7 minutes tops, and move on. I always have a tendency as a lecturer. My students, they can attest to that. They ask a simple question, and I never give them a simple answer. I always give a preface, and historically this, and etymologically that, and that's my cross to bear if we're already talking about the old city of Jerusalem.
Well, listen, Netanel, you are so knowledgeable and you're so giving that, you just want to share your knowledge. And I totally get that, because when I wear my hat of a regular guide, because I also do a lot of regular tours and not just the running tours, I have that, long and explain and stuff like that. But in a running tour, as opposed to a regular tour where people walk a little bit and just see a little bit, you cover more mileage, you run more, and the guiding points are concise. And it's hard to guide a short story. There was a famous professor once that said, I didn't have any time, so I wrote a lot, meaning to reduce a subject to a story of 2 to 3 minutes. It takes time. It literally, I sat down and I wrote the texts to the stories that I would tell. to make sure that I don't elaborate too much, because running tours are directed towards runners, and us runners, we're crazy. We like to wake up early and we like to run. And we have this thing where we have our running watches and we don't want to like slow down too much. So I need to talk to the hearts of the runners very concisely. So, so the heartbeat won't go too down. But the plus about doing Jerusalem running tours is the topography of Jerusalem. So there is a more spiritual, educational side to the topography. And then for me as a guide, when I get people coming from flatlands and they're running up a hill, they really need a break. They're huffing and puffing, and it's hard. Jerusalem has this great topography. And so that's, when I guide, when I see people huffing and puffing, I can talk a lot like you, I can do that too. So I just kind of wait and see until the last person is like, okay, and we move on.
I cannot run like you, so it makes you not at the current shape, at least, and not in the foreseeable future. I'll have to go for 2 years in San Diego, maybe, to get.
No, you know what? Physically, people who run, it's not so hard, because you run and stop and run and stop, and then running is available for beginner runners. Mm-hmm. It's more of the running is an educational tool to get from one place to another faster, and covering more mileage with a heartbeat. And Jerusalem, the heartbeat is also because of the run, and it's also because of what you feel, and it's also what you hear. It's like this wholesome mind, body, and soul experience. Amazing. The topography, when it comes to the content of the running, Jerusalem has changed. All the stories have changed in the past 4,000 years, but there's something that didn't change, and that's the topography. The hills that were here in the time of King David are the hills that we're still running today. The valleys, the hills. And when you can connect the stories, when you feel your legs and you feel your muscles throbbing, when you're like pushing yourself uphill, you can really make a point to a lot of biblical stories, to a lot of historical stories, where you can really connect with your feet to thousands of years of history. So it adds kind of like the endorphins, the runner's high, as we call it, when you just turn happy after you run a bit. I know people, my mom is like, you do that? You run? Is someone chasing you? And I'm like, no, I just, I run for fun.
Right. And again, I cannot hear you without thinking of the Psalms. Omedot hayu ragleinu b'sh'araich, where our feet were standing at your gates, O Jerusalem. And Yerushalayim harim saviv la, Jerusalem is surrounded by mountains, as you were talking about the topography of Jerusalem. It's all there, very biblical. So for me as a Bible teacher, I resonate with what you said. So which inclination you take your runners to, in Jerusalem? Do you have regular courses or?
Yeah, I have 12 routes. My first route I called the classical route, which I built, maybe a month before COVID broke out. My whole business was based on running with tourists in English, because in my 25 years of guiding, I never guided in Hebrew, because I mostly worked with Americans, Anglo-speaking communities. So when I built my first route, I built it surrounding the walls of Jerusalem, because Jerusalem was so packed with tourists. There was no way you can run through the old city. And I spent a lot of money on marketing and on Facebook and on a website, and trying to pick up something that's called a business, which I have no background in, because I studied history. I don't know anything about building a business, but it was kind of like trial and error. I just, someone said, do you have a website? I'm like, well, that's a good idea. I'll go build a website. Do you have, photos? I'm like, well, that's a good idea. And I went, got photos, I kind of made it up as I went along. So when I finally had everything organized, I was targeting a market of the marathoners who were coming to the Jerusalem Marathon, and COVID broke out. So I just sat to myself and I said, well, that's too bad. What am I going to do now? And that's when I started working with Israeli groups. And so my route changed a little bit, which brings me back to your question about, what do we do in our run? So our run will start, there's a place where we go all the way downhill to the Valley of Hinnom, where traditionally it says in the Bible that that's where there was some kind of a sacrifice to the Molech. And that's kind of topographically, it's a very low point. And it's also, it's kind of it's a hard subject to talk about human sacrifice. And then we run up Mount Zion.
So
And
you
Mount
go
Zion,
through the
it's a pretty
steps.
good, yeah, that's the Valley of Hinnom, what you're pointing at right now. And then
You're
from
going
there,
up the steps.
no, we're going around the way that you drew through the Pope's Road.
Mm.
And then from there we go in through Zion Gate into the Old City. And the reason I started running through the Old City was because there was COVID and running was allowed. And Israelis were looking for somewhere to go to that seemed like abroad, you know, because
So
Rome
it
was
was
closed, the
either
skies were closed.
running through Jerusalem or walking your dogs through Jerusalem, because that was the two things allowed in COVID, like exercising and taking out your pets.
Yeah, so all of a sudden my business was legitimate with the COVID restrictions. You can run, you know, sometimes it was a group of 10, sometimes it was a group of 20. So I was able to lift my business when everything was in lockdown. And the old city was completely empty, which is something that I've never seen in all my years of guiding, was an empty city of Jerusalem. And we would just run through, you know, the rooftop overview and running through the entrance of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre and then through the New Gate and doing some neighborhoods around Jerusalem. So there's a lot of uphill and downhill. You know, people are like, when is it flat? I'm like, kind of like Jerusalem. You know, Jerusalem's never really flat. There's always something going up or down in
Only
Jerusalem.
the
And
bread, only the bread, flat bread. You
yeah,
don't
exactly.
get.
Only flat bread. Yeah.
Right. So that's the Israeli. And what do you do now that there is, you know, some of these streets are packed again?
Well, first of all, when we run on the edges of the day, on the fringes.
Mm.
So we'll either run early, 6 or 7 a.m. And so if tourists, I work with tourists now, of course, too. They find me through my website. I run sometimes with one or two. Sometimes a bigger group turns to me. But I have to say that the volume of my work is mostly Israelis, and that's thanks to COVID. I work with a lot of Israeli running groups. I did this research about how many Israeli runners are there in Israel, and there's around 1 million. There are over
You're
300
making
running
me feel
groups.
bad right now.
What?
I'm saying you're making me feel very bad. Very, yeah. After
Well,
Yom
if you'll start
Kippur,
running after this, that's great.
I thought I, you know, confessed all my sins. Now I see that I have a few more. There are a million people running
It's
out
not
there,
a
and
sin.
I'm basically a couch potato. I mean,
No.
uh,
First of all, if this will help you run, running is amazing for everyone at all ages, at any pace.
right.
Yeah. Yeah, so luckily I got to work with the Jerusalem municipality, which wanted me to build running tours in the different neighborhoods, and they gave me a budget. So I built tours in probably 7 neighborhoods in Jerusalem with the initiative of the local Jewish, whatever, it's kind of like the JCC there. I don't know, maybe the YMCA, kind of like an entity of every neighborhood that kind of wants to push extracurriculum activities for families and stuff like that. So I was lucky to really work inwards with Israelis, with Jerusalemites in Jerusalem, in my city. And by the time COVID was over, I was like, okay, now I need to build my website in English because I focused everything in Hebrew. And so now I'm introducing myself into the English speaking market again. I have a partnership with the David Citadel Hotel. I do tours for them on Fridays throughout August. And, you know, just the partnerships are great because you can reach people that way.
Right. Very interesting. Did you get to run with famous people who came to Jerusalem and wanted to run through it?
Oh, well, I think I would have loved to run. I mean, like if you would ask me, who are the historical figures you would like to run with? I mean, there are a bunch I would love to run with and ask some questions. But I did run with one of Israel's Olympic medalist of running. Her name is Nili Avramsky. She won many medals. But that's I mean, I wanted to run with like sports people and stuff like that. I ran with Australian athletes once, but yeah, but that's definitely on my list. You know, I want to run with people who are athletes and enjoy and influencers and people who can talk about it, because I think that in the long run, running it for kids to educate, you know, elementary school and high school. Kids don't have an attention span today, you know, with everything, with the screens they use and the exposure to social media, everything is a few seconds. And I realized that my guiding points, you get all the information in a smaller bite. And when you run, it makes kids listen better. So, you know, I would love to get this further and really to push this as an educational tool to run the stories of the Bible in Jerusalem instead of standing there. You know how bored we used to get on our school trips, Netanel. It was terrible.
Oh, no, listen, I think that the people who turn out to be tour guides, I said to my friends in the course, I think in every school bus, there is the one kid who nags the guide and asks him all the questions and listens and then compares. And then uh, I think they collect all of these nerds and they put them on one bus and they call it a tour guide course. Basically, not everyone, you look like a cool kid, but basically I think they bunch all of them together and they call it the tour guide course, and that's how they make it. So the empty seat of the bus is empty, you know, because there are no cool kids to sit there. No,
Wait,
but
but I was a
I
cool kid
understand.
and I did the tour guide course.
Yeah, you are the exception. You are also
I
running.
never finished high school, Netanel. I don't have a high school diploma.
Yeah, what can
I
I say?
don't, but I have my master's with honors from Hebrew University. So I
It
did
makes
get
the
my
both of us.
education.
Yeah,
Whatever.
very
I
good.
was ADD. I was hyperactive. Could you tell?
You know, listen, I can tell you're active, very active. I wouldn't incorporate the word deficiency there. I think I'm sure you're
Thank you.
learning.
Thank you. We
Yeah,
should
sure,
change that. Yes.
sure. I'm also, you know, luckily I have to teach. I don't have to listen most of the time. So yeah, so luckily I get to talk rather than to listen, which makes it a little bit
Yeah.
more bearable for me. However, um, interestingly, you've been doing Jerusalem or touring, guiding people in Jerusalem so many years, and I'd love to ask you about, you know, few of your favorite spots in Jerusalem, if you would like to share.
I do. I have to say that in a lot of my tours, there'll always be some kind of a graveyard, some kind of an ancient or modern graveyard. I think that graveyards are very interesting and tell us a story, a contemporary story of that time. It's like a window into that time because how you were buried shows a lot about what you believed in and what you lived in. So one of my favorite sites, also because I grew up very close to it, it's called Ketef Hinom, and they're first temple burial caves. And when I was growing up, it was just bare in a field. You walked and it looked like a cave that was broken and nobody really knew what it was. It was a great hangout place when we were teenagers, but I never knew what it was. And then I did the tour guide course. And I really fell in love with the site. And I actually, it's in every one of my running tours right now because it's an incredible story that tells us, that resonates in our present until today. So what we're looking at, when Netanel put up on the screen, is first temple burial site. And the way that people used to bury then was, it was in a burial cave, and you would go into like one room and then into a smaller room. Here, exactly, you're pointing, and you would rest the body that was wrapped in shrouds on a bed rest. Now there are multiple bed rests over here. It's not one individual burial like we have in the Second Temple. It was a multiple burial. So imagine the intimacy that you had by going into this room and resting a body on one of these bed rests. There was also a belief that we need to equip the soul with equipment for the next life or for the journey to the next life. That's a great picture, Nathaniel. Very good.
Yeah, I know, I'm gifted that way.
So you can see one of the bed rests, and there are different like inclinations in the stone that you can see the multiple places where you can rest bodies. And so people would equip the bodies with perfumes, with food, with charms, and leave that cave and exit the cave for around 11 months to a year. And what would happen to the body after a year, the flesh would disintegrate and there would only be bones. And what they would do, they would collect the bones and throw them in a pit. There was a communal pit. And it really says in the Bible that they were collected with their forefathers. And so really literally and figuratively speaking, you can see just in this bare bedrock archaeology that you can collect the bones and throw them into one of these hollow caves that Netanel is showing. So that's amazing. And You know, some Jewish traditions we practice, but sometimes it's hard to know what the source is. And you know, and in Judaism, after someone dies, we go up to the grave after a year. It's called a yahrzeit in Yiddish. And maybe our custom of going up to a grave after a year is engraved in that tradition of the first temple burial, when you would go to the grave and collect the bones. I don't know, but I think it's pretty cool if that's true, that we are still traditionally going to a grave after a year. Maybe that's over there, but that's our whole story in our relationship with the past. And living in Jerusalem, you live that relationship with your past. You see it, you guide it. One of the amazing findings that were found in this site, it looked like a cigarette butt when they were excavating. And one of the main archaeologists, his name was Gabi Barkai, and he said, hold on to that. And it took a very long time for them to kind of open this thing. And it was a charm that was probably wrapped around a necklace. And it was what Netanel is showing you. It was the priestly blessing written on that charm. And that was an amazing find, because you can see where you have a piece of the Bible in the form of someone's charm, and you find it 3,200, 2,800 years afterwards. And, you know, you can connect the Bible to the place in so many ways. So this guiding spot is one of my favorite guiding spots. It's short.
I have to tell you, you know, you probably know this story, but a few years ago, I did an interview for a TV show. Maybe some of you guys know the show, called Ask the Source on 24 channel 24 in America. And the guy interviewing after me was none other than Gabi Barkai, Dr. Gabi Barkai. So I finished my interview about biblical Hebrew, and he was interviewed about his excavations. And then he asked me, can you take me home? He didn't, I don't know, he didn't have a cab or whatever. So I gave him a ride home. And he told me that famous story of the finding of the silver amulets in person, you know, and I'm sure you know this story, you've heard it, and I'll tell it to the audience, because even the story of the finding of these amulets is a super funny story. Gabi Barkai is a very famous archaeologist. I'm not sure that he would be the most tolerant counselor in a youth movement, let's put it that way. And they sent some Boy Scouts or kids to help them with the excavations. And among those kids, there was a kid exactly like with a bus. Remember that we've talked about the kids in the bus and the one that nags the guide. So that kind of a kid was nagging him all the time. So Gabi Barkai, Dr. Barkai, thought of a way to avoid this nagging kid, and he sent him to one of these burial holes. And he said to himself, listen, this was already excavated. There is no chance that there is something inside there. So I'll send him there, and I'll tell him that he has to check it very well. You know, I'll get a few minutes of you know, peace and quiet from that boy and his questions and nagging. And he sent him in, and lo and behold, 2 minutes afterwards, he feels that familiar tagging of the shirt, Dr. Barkai or Gabi, whatever, however he called him. And he looks back, and again, that nagging kid is, and he sees he's got a full, I don't know, jar, or maybe already the silver amulets in his hand. And he cannot believe, you know, Dr. Barkai could not believe why did you move it? Why did you do? So they went into that area, which is here in the picture, where they found the amulets. And there they found it. Again, how were all of the scholars who looked there could not find it, and that kid could? That's also a very interesting story. They said he had a hammer, the kid, and he worked with a hammer, and probably the ceiling collapsed and covered all of those findings that were before, and nobody bothered, you know, because they assumed it was already plundered and pillaged by so many people in the past. And when that kid tried the hammer, he was able to go through that collapsed ceiling and find the amazing, amazing findings there, jewelry, and obviously the silver amulets that you've mentioned. So he told me the story
That's
personally.
amazing. Only here will you give a ride to the main archaeologist who found one of the most amazing finds. That's how
Yes,
small,
Israel is very much like that.
crazy.
Israel,
Yeah.
I think my students already know that, every time something comes up, a personality comes up, I explain to them that, somehow I'm connected to that person. If I were to listen to it and not know how Israelis are, I would say, come on, there's no chance.
Right.
Like, for instance, guys, just what would be the chance that I almost worked with Yael's brother like 15 years ago, yeah, which really happened. We met, we talked, we didn't work out. It didn't work out at the end, but we almost worked together. So, what are the chances? And the chances are in Israel close to 100% with everybody. Yeah. So burial, yeah, indeed, as they say, the necropolis defines the metropolis, or yeah, the city of the dead defines the main city. What else? Let's not talk just about the dead. Let's not speak ill or anything else about the dead. What other living places have you kind of engraved into your touring, must see places, or the most beloved by you specifically?
Well, listen, I love the old city. It's my office for the past 25 years. So I decided to find a new favorite site, just to kind of make things interesting for me in Jerusalem. And running helped because I needed to plan a new running tour. And I really fell in love with the neighborhood French Hill and the campus of Hebrew University. There's a necropolis there too, a big one. So I won't focus on that, but French Hill is a very interesting neighborhood that was
Starting with a name, which is ridiculously funny as well.
yeah. French Hill is a new neighborhood. It started in the 70s, post Six-Day War. Hebrew University, which is on Mount Scopus, was Israeli. But in between 1948 and 1967, half of Jerusalem was Jordanian, except for an island that was Hebrew University. So there was like this island of Hebrew University surrounded by Jordan, and then the Israeli Jerusalem was further away. So when Jerusalem was taken over in 1967 by the Israelis, Levi Eshkol, who was the prime minister at the time, wanted to build neighborhoods that he called the lock neighborhoods, that kind of locked Hebrew University to secure it. A lot of the building post 67 was, let's secure these places so there'll be some kind of a Israeli consistency to connect everything. And so this idea of building these neighborhoods started in the 70s. It's called French Hill because of the lands that this neighborhood was brought from originally belonged to the French church. It was a French order. There is an urban myth, however, that says that there was a British general called General French. A British general called General French is buried in the British cemetery not far. But that is not the true story. It's just the lands belong.
It's a great story, though.
It is. I know. I'm sorry. You're not supposed to ruin a good story with facts. I won't. You can keep on telling it.
First of all,
it's
you
a
tell
good story.
the interesting story. Then you can give the facts as well.
Exactly. That's why I give both stories.
Right.
I think Jerusalem's magic is that it has so many mistakes. The Tower of David, all these things that make it more interesting. So who cares? It was a French, General French.
Right.
So French Hill was a neighborhood that was a vibrant neighborhood in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. It's where progressive Judaism had schools over there. There was a lot of Americans lived over there. And a lot of academics from Hebrew University, because it was a neighborhood right next to Hebrew University. But what's going on today in French Hill is super interesting and kind of reflects what Jerusalem is today. So today, French Hill is divided into three different main demographics. One are Israelis who still live there, who are either academics or leftovers from the first people who lived in the neighborhood. Another demographic are Arabs who come from the north. What we call in Israel the northern Arabs, the Arabs of 1948, which are Arabs who got citizenship, who were part of Israel, who were in Israel until today. And so they studied at university. A lot of them are, doctors, lawyers, and a lot of them started purchasing apartments in French Hill to kind of answer to a different problem in Jerusalem, which nobody refers to, is I'm just going to zoom out for a second. Jerusalem is the biggest city in Israel. It's 1 million residents. It's like by far the biggest city than any other city in Israel. If we're talking about Tel Aviv, it's 400,000. Any other big city is 350,000. Jerusalem is 1 million residents. From those 1 million residents, 400,000 are East Jerusalem Arabs. When I say East Jerusalem Arabs, these are Arabs who lived under Jordanian rule up until 1967. So the Arabs of Jerusalem who were under Jordan between 1940 and 1967 are not at all like the Arabs who come from the north of Israel from 1948. So the East Jerusalemite Arabs don't necessarily speak Hebrew. If they want to fill out documents with the Ministry of Interior, they need help. So all of a sudden you have a phenomenon that the Arabs from the north are moving to Jerusalem to give that there's work with the East Jerusalemite Arabs. And so you have that whole demographic in French Hill too. And look how long it took me to explain to you why they're here. It kind of tells a bigger story about Jerusalem.
And that was short because I would do it in probably half an hour. So you unbelievably, you did it in a very concise way. I would probably go through, I don't know, much more time, burn the.
But you see the point, but the point is done. You don't need all that background.
Right. Listen, I'm not avoiding the short and concise as well. I've got a YouTube playlist of, I think by now, more than 150 videos that are all between 30 and 60 seconds about different places in Israel. So I do the short version as well.
It's hard. It's hard to leave out a lot of information. And also,
I've got one
don't
about
forget
Finom as well. So I'll share it later. But when I'm sitting and not standing, it can take more time. Maybe I should run.
Exactly. When you run, you can't talk so much.
60 seconds videos and make them 6-second videos.
So the third demographic of French Hill are ultra-Orthodox, but more liberal ultra-Orthodox. The ultra-Orthodox have many shades of black. It's not just one. And so it's the more liberal ultra-Orthodox who live there. So in one building in French Hill, you can see a woman coming out with a hijab, a young hipster who's a student, and an ultra-Orthodox person, all living in a building.
Very Jerusalem, this amalgamation or this mix of different demographics is so Jerusalem. Maybe that's the defining feature of Jerusalem. Maybe this combination that is sometimes unbelievable. I had a friend speaking here not too long ago who is an Israeli Arab Christian whose grandfather was partnered with a Yiddish speaking Holocaust survivor. So his Arab grandfather would speak Yiddish with him, the Arab grandson, when he was older. So crazy stuff that is only in Israel, as you said, but Jerusalem is maybe the essentialization of that mix that you see in all of Israel, but specifically in Jerusalem. I remember, I think it was by Professor Etkes that we went for a kind of to his house in French Hill to have a kind of a private lesson. I'm a graduate of Revivim. I don't know if you've heard about the Revivim program, but we had kind of a very special relationship with the professors at the Hebrew University because of that. And some of our lessons were in kind of a more intimate atmosphere. So I think he lived in French Hill, and
he did.
Yeah.
I just got a question here. If every one of these communities, if they do things that are integrated together, they each live in their own community. So they pretty much live in their own community. I think that where they live together, and in Jerusalem, where you can find life together, is in the supermarket, is in the post, is in
right.
It's not, I can't, sugarcoat it. It's not like, they're living together and have these great activities. And I live in a mixed neighborhood. I live in a neighborhood called Abu Tol, where it's 16,000 residents and maybe 4,000 are Jewish and the rest are Arabs. And everyone calls my neighborhood a mixed neighborhood, but we're not mixed. We live in one area and they live in another area. And I can tell you there's a lot of initiatives that go on in our neighborhood. If there's a cafe of language where we teach each other Arabic and and Hebrew, but these initiatives are so small. It's very hard to get people out. It's very hard to get people out of their comfort zone. And so, but I don't call it coexistence. I call it parallel living. Parallel living happens in Jerusalem every day, every second, all the time. And that's amazing because we parallel live.
With glimpses of coexistence, I want to share a picture I got today, if you don't mind, guys. This is a picture I got today over WhatsApp. Did you see that one?
That's amazing.
It's amazing. It's very Israeli, though.
Very
Israeli. You see the guy. It reminded me a little bit of the Judea Capta also because of the coin of the Judea Capta. But nonetheless, you can see the guy who is changing the tire is probably a volunteer or an organization called Yedidim, which means friends. And they help everyone if they're stuck, if they need to change a tire or get locked outside the car or outside the home or whatever. There is a volunteering organization, and you call them, and they have volunteers all throughout Israel, and they come and they help you. And you can see this guy is helping a Franciscan monk, right, to change a tire.
amazing.
And that's kind of only in Jerusalem. I cannot tell you exactly where in Jerusalem this is. Maybe Yael can, but
I need to see what the sign says. There's a sign.
Right.
You can read it.
Right, there's a sign there, which but it's a heartwarming picture. And sometimes you're right, there is parallel existence, but sometimes glimpses.
That's what I said. There are a lot of initiatives. People take
Right.
part of it. There is a beginning. But like
Right.
this all together, singing Kumbaya, we're not there yet.
No, we're not there yet. And there are difficult moments, not just between Jews and Arabs, also Christian churches, and it's difficult, the relationship, Muslims, Christians, and Jews in different places. Again, no need to sugarcoat it. There are all kinds of instances, but there is a hope of Jerusalem being a unifying factor, not just dividing one, which is sometimes that's the case with Jerusalem. Guys, I want to open it for you to ask Yael questions, and it's a great opportunity because Yael knows so much about Jerusalem and about touring Jerusalem and about running in Jerusalem. So it's the perfect opportunity. If you'd like to ask a question, you're more than welcome. And if you'd like to share where you're from, so that would be also nice. Go ahead, don't be shy.
And it's okay if you are.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Does anyone know Love Country Stores?
What's Love Country Stores? Is it like an American thing?
Yeah, it's a convenience store. It's a chain of gas stations that my uncle started. So a lot of Americans know Love Country Stores because my mom's from Oklahoma and her brother is one of the biggest owners of gas stations in America. So
I had a student once. Her name is still Kathy Cadu. And her father also had a chain of stores, and if I'm not mistaken, also in Oklahoma. Her father's name was Chester Cadu, if I'm not mistaken, and I think their chain was in Oklahoma, but I'm not positive about it. A Quick Trip.
Yeah.
Quick Trip. Do you anyway? So yeah, it's a convenience store. No, I seen Arizona maybe, and yeah, Oklahoma, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Yeah, they were from Oklahoma as well.
Funny.
Yeah, I'm sure your uncle,
For
they're in the
sure.
competition. What do you mean?
Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, Ulrike.
Um, I would like to know something about the pool of Siloam. Where is it located and how looks it today?
So the Shiloach pool is in the city of David, if you want to pull up a picture.
Yeah, sure. I'm already on it.
And Shiloach, there's an Arab village right above it that's called Silwan, which kind of preserves the ancient name of the water spring of the Shiloach. The water that is fed into the Shiloach pool is from a natural spring. Let's see.
Can you see the picture, the screen?
I'll make it larger.
Like larger as in zoom out or zoom in?
No, zoom in, zoom in.
Obviously, you cannot see the underground, but yeah.
Yeah, so you can also elaborate, Netanel. I mean, the Shiloach pool right now is in an archaeological site called the City of David. And the City of David is in, it's like over a small hilltop dipped in the village of Silwan. And it's you can walk down there, you can go visit over there. It's not all dug out, the whole pool, right? Only the first third is kind of exposed.
Yeah, the basically the pool is supposed to be a 3/4 of an acre. It's a very, very big, it was supposedly a very big pool in the Second Temple period. 3/4 of an acre big. That's anyway, that's the American equivalent of 3 dunam in the Turkish Israeli measurement that we use. And essentially they're digging it, excavating it. There are some issues exactly. We're talking about the Siloam pool of the Second Temple period, roughly the time of Jesus. The Siloam pool was wherever they let the water of the Shiloach, come out, which changed over the years. But that famous Shiloach pool of Second Temple period is currently excavated, and they did find out about a third of it, as you said. It's amazing. They did not find all of that they expected to find there. Again, the story, as always, involves an accident or a tractor that knocked off something, and then they had to call the archaeologists to excavate there. As you know, half of the stories are like that. In Israel, if you want to see how I digress, in Israel, if you want to bother someone building something, you throw a rock or a pottery inside, then they're stuck for 2 years because they have to excavate there, and they obviously find something because you always have something. Not that I recommend dealing with the contractor that way, but they do sometimes do that, and they have to pay for the excavations. The people who are, I'm not suggesting that you should do it, but I've heard stories. So they're excavating it, and the City of David is always excavated. It's actually the most excavated place on earth, if I'm not mistaken. And it has been excavated, like even the stories about the excavation of the City of David can fill a whole tour, just the kind of cloak and dagger stories and the Indiana Jones. They say that Indiana Jones is based on some of the people who excavated the City of David. So, yeah. So that's a little bit about the Pool of Siloam. It's currently excavated. You can walk through the tunnel, obviously. The tunnel would get you go out next to a pool that is in Siloam, but not the Second Temple period Pool of Siloam. It's a pool that is related to, if I'm not mistaken, the Byzantine time. And then the pool of the Second Temple period is excavated, but currently without water. If you come in the winter, there might be water there. But currently, it's not with water. The location where the Second Temple period pool of Siloam was is without water. You can see water of the Siloam in a form of a pool when you come out of the Siloam, the Shiloach tunnel. But again, it's of the Byzantine time. And God willing, next September, I'm planning to bring a group. We'll see the Siloam tunnel. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. DJ, yeah.
Yes, I'm planning to go to Israel for a month. 4 weeks is what I'm planning. But how is the best way for me to organize something to have the ultimate experience in Israel?
Are you traveling on your own or are you coming with a group?
No, I'm traveling on my own.
Well, definitely a tour of Jerusalem. I think that a guided tour is valuable with Netanel. You should guide her.
Maybe depends on the schedule. I don't promise anything.
Yeah, but definitely listen, the internet can supply with a lot of information. There are a lot of day tours that leave Jaffa Gate at 10 a.m. You can just, Google search all the different possibilities. So you could, as an independent traveler, you can definitely join day tours that leave. If it's the Old City, if it's Mitzad or the Dead Sea. So there's a tourist information center, what Netanel is showing you, that's at the entrance of Jaffa Gate. And most of the tours are decent and they're run by professional guides. And the benefit of it is that it's economic because you join a bigger group and it's not private. So I would say that in terms of touring, those are good options. I know, do you have Netanel, if we can give any recommendations? I know that Abrams Hostel have really good tours.
Mm-hmm. And they're also very inexpensive to stay.
They're very inexpensive and very informative. There's also the free tours of Jerusalem, which you can go on for free and it's tip-based, and you can add one of their holy city tours. I personally know their guides and they're all great. So I would also do the free tours of Jerusalem.
Okay.
But how would a 1 month experience be different than the usual week or 10 days tour? What would you do differently? That's something that I want to know based on your experience. How, what would you recommend to a person who's coming for a month that is different than what you would recommend for a person who's coming for seven or 10 days?
Oh, well, that's great. First of all, living in a place for a month. I mean, would you stay put in one place and get an apartment and really feel the city that you're living in, which is a great option, where to have like a base. And go on and you can spread it out a little bit. Go on a tour. You don't have to tour every day when you're here for a month. I would definitely spread it out a little bit, live in one place for a few days, go live in another place, maybe Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, Haifa, Nazareth, Bethlehem. You can play with the cities of interest. And really,
Yes.
I think that there's a lot of value in staying put in the same place for a few days to kind of get the vibe, even if it's not without the touring, if it's going to the markets, if it's meeting the people, just kind of like being. So maybe throughout that month, I would make an activity to do, twice a week or something, or once a week, depending on your budget or your availability or how lazy you want to be or how active you want to be. Everybody's very individual and do what you want. And just kind of like pinpoint different activities, because there are tours everywhere in Israel. You can go to Nazareth, you can go to the Golan Heights, you can hike. There's so many possibilities. You can
Yes.
just kind of like make a list of things that you'd like to do and plan your month, and maybe Airbnbs or rentals or budget hotels, whoever you choose to accommodate yourself in Jerusalem. But like in Jerusalem, I love the idea of staying in monasteries and churches, or inside the old city, are very unique places where you can really live the old city or the new neighborhoods.
Or the Austrian one.
The Austrian hospice, Allegra, there's the Lutheran, there's so many fun possibilities that are, I would take a carry-on for the old city. I wouldn't, carry a big luggage. That's
Nice. You wanted to say schlep and you didn't use
I
it
did.
because-
I did. I wanted to say
because
schlep.
the audience is not Jewish. Yeah.
But schlep is already international, right? We can say schlep.
You could say if you live in New York, people would understand you even if you're not Jewish, but not everybody. Some
Nope.
people here, though are German, so they might understand you
So
nonetheless.
schlep is to just carry, but like in a complaining way. It's like to carry and complain, but you can't really say that in one word in English.
Yeah.
Oh, the bag is so heavy. Why did I bring it? That's a schlep.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good.
Very good. Very
Thank
good.
you.
I love it. Okay, guys, I want to thank Yael for coming and teaching us so much and really sharing the amazing experience of running in Jerusalem. I sent you all her website, her social media, and some of you have already checked it out. And send it to people who are into running and into Jerusalem. Yael, thank you so much for
Thank
coming.
you so much. It was so
such
nice
a
to meet you
pleasure,
all.
A pleasure. And I learned so much, and I'm sure people here learned so much as well. And I hope that we get to work together in the future. And guys, thank you. Give a heart. Thank you for
Thank you, Tadaraba. Thank you so much.
We didn't talk about the fact you have such a beautiful biblical name, and it also related to the national symbol of the natural parks in Israel. But maybe that's for the next time.
For the next time.
Right.
And by the way, my second name is Esther. So I'm Yael
Oh.
Esther. So
Actually,
wow.
Yael is more
lovely.
of a Hebrew name than Esther, as you
Lovely.
probably know. But never, we'll leave that for the next time, God willing.
Lovely.
Thank you
Okay.
all. Shalom, y'all.
Bye-bye. Thank you
Bye-bye.
guys for
Thank you.
coming.
Lots of love.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.